When I was about 16, 9 years ago, my family was living in a suburban area outside of LA. It was a nice neighborhood. Kids rode their bikes in groups. Parents waved at each other and helped keep an eye on people's houses. You could join a barbecue if you walked by at the right time. Well, my dad was working nights at a hospital in the city that left myself, female 16, my mom 36, my sister 12, and my brother 8, home at night from 6:30 p.m. to 7:30 a.m. the next day. One night, we are cooking, listening to music, and just all around having a good night, and everyone's in bed by 9. I'm woken up to the sound of our front door being rattled, and my mom calling for my dad like he's home. Our house was laid out like this. There is a front door in a small entryway, and the right side wall, facing the door from the outside, was my brother's room. Myself and my sister were on the other side of him, and the doorway led into our dining room. My mom's room was off from the living room towards the back of the house, so she typically turned on the lights to come by our rooms. It wasn't all that uncommon for my dad to get let off a shift a few hours early and end up going home before 7. My front door was frosted glass in the middle that was clear enough we could see whoever was at the door. It was old and a little off, so typically you had to put a little force into opening the door, even if it's unlocked. This part my mom filled in. She had gotten up, also hearing the door, and thought my dad was home as I did. However, upon calling out for my dad to confirm and turning on the light switch, whoever it was at the door froze and noticeably jumped. She had still been walking closer to the door to open it, still half asleep, when she realized the man in the doorway was as tall as my dad, but had a full head of hair, as well as his outline not matching the familiar outline of my dad coming home in scrubs. This man was wider than my dad, and once he could see my mom in the doorway, he started not only turning the knob, but throwing himself against the frosted glass. Okay, back to what I know. I don't know what kept me from rolling over and going back to bed, but in the next few seconds, I heard my mom scream and sat up in time to hear her footsteps and see her as she disappeared into her bedroom to come back out with the revolver my dad had bought her for her birthday. At this point, I had rolled over and checked my cell phone quickly to see it was 1:30 in the morning, and I dialed 911 while my mom was pointing the gun at whoever was at the door, trying to force their way inside. "Stop or I'll shoot you. I'm on the phone with the police, and they're on their way. I will use force if you enter my home." My mom was screaming at the huge man at the door, who, after hearing her the second and third time, finally stepped back from the door and was just staring at our shapes from the other side of the frosted glass. After a moment's thought, he seemed to like his chances because he had stepped forward again and only ran once my mom pulled the pin back and repeated what she had been saying, adding that she might decide not to even wait for him to be inside. He ran off, as I mentioned, and I stayed on the phone with 911 as my mom stood at the doorway, her gun still in both hands, aimed at the door the way my dad had taught her to hold it just the weekend before when we'd all gone to the range. It was only a moment after the man had fled that 2 uniformed officers filled the doorway the man had just been in, and when they knocked, I realized, after she didn't respond to them identifying themselves, how terrified my mother was. Her voice shook as she told the officers that she had a weapon and that she wanted to hear their badge numbers before she opened the door so I could confirm with the dispatcher. Once they did, she opened the revolver and unloaded it, putting it on the table and crying as I opened the door for the police. They took our statements, had several patrol cars out looking, and found him a few hours later, 6 blocks from our home. However, he'd made it into the residence he was trying to break into, and they caught him in the middle of robbing the retired couple he had knocked unconscious. So, home invader, let's not meet. When I was 10 years old, I lived in a relatively small town in Texas, in a small house with my mom. My mom has always had a very caring heart for those in need. So when my uncle called her one night and told her he ran into a homeless girl at the local park, my mom offered to help her out for a day or so, just to get her back on her feet. When the girl arrived at my house, she said her name was Laura. Laura told us she was 16 at the time. She seemed like a shy girl. When my mother asked what she was doing out on the streets, Laura told us she had been kicked out of her home by her mom because her mom had accused her of sleeping with her boyfriend. Laura told us that the allegation wasn't true. She told us her mother's boyfriend was the one who came on to her. My mom gave Laura a place to sleep in the guest bedroom that night. The next day, after breakfast, Laura asked to use my mom's house phone to call her mom to see if she could come get some of her things from her mom's house. Laura's mom never answered the phone, and we felt bad for her. As a 10-year-old girl, I couldn't imagine what she must have been going through. Later that day, I remember watching TV in the living room and minding my own business, but I could feel someone staring at me, so I turned my head where I felt the gaze. Laura had been sending me a glare so cold that if looks could kill, I would have dropped dead. I was confused and a little startled. I turned my head away from her quickly and went back to watching TV, but I could still feel Laura's cold gaze. I couldn't understand what I had done to her to cause her to look at me with such hate. The next day, it happened once more. I was in the kitchen getting a glass of water when I could feel someone looking at me. I turned my head to the side and saw Laura's head peering around the corner at me. Her eyes were dark and laced with hatred. It frightened me, and I felt so confused as to why she was looking at me like this. I didn't want to cause any trouble, so I didn't bring up Laura's death glares to my mother at all. Later that night, my uncle had joined us for dinner. He had stopped by to see how everything was with Laura, and if we had luck, finding her a place to live with one of her family members. After dinner, I was washing my plate in the sink when I heard a loud growling sound come from the dining room. I turned my head to see Laura shaking and growling like some sort of wild animal. My mom and uncle looked disturbed and worried. Laura threw herself onto the floor and began thrashing around and screaming as if she were possessed. I was absolutely terrified. It was a scary thing to witness. I grew up very religious. My mom and uncle began praying out loud for Laura while I ran to my room and closed the door. This went on for 2 hours, but it felt like an eternity of horror. I could hear Laura screaming like a mad woman and growling like some sort of deranged beast. I don't think any of us knew exactly what was going on. After my mom and uncle had prayed for Laura for what felt like forever, Laura told us she was free from an evil demon that had taken over her. None of us were sure what had caused her behavior. None of us were sure what had even happened. I peeked my head out of my room to see Laura smiling happily while she curled up on the couch with a blanket. Her eyes opened, and she shot a cold glare at me. I quickly closed my bedroom door in fear. I placed a chair in front of my bedroom door and went to sleep. I woke up the next morning by my mom waking me up. She told me that she was taking me out to eat at my favorite restaurant. When I asked her if Laura was going, she gave me a serious expression and spoke. "Your uncle's going to take Laura back to her mom's house. He slept on the couch last night after what happened. He and I were talking when the two of you had gone to sleep, and we pieced together that Laura made the entire performance up last night. She is not stable, and we think she's dangerous." As I heard my mother say those words, relief washed over me. I got dressed and went to the car to go to the restaurant with my mom. When we got to the car, we saw Laura and my uncle getting into his truck with her. Laura looked angry. Her expression was of a child when you don't give them what they want. She got into my uncle's car and they drove away. I'm 22 now, and I've never forgotten about this horrific incident that happened in my life years ago. After that day, I never saw Laura or heard anything else about her, ever again. So this story literally just happened this morning at around 6 a.m. I feel the need to share it since it's been on my mind all day. I was leaving for work this morning. I had to be there early, so it was still pitch black outside, and there's not a lot of lighting on my street, so you really can't see anything without headlights or a flashlight of some kind. So I get in my car and drive to the end of my street and come to a stop at the stop sign. Just then, I notice there was a woman standing on the other side of the street, just standing there. So at this point, I probably hang at that stop sign for a couple of seconds, because now I'm a little concerned that there's a woman just standing on the side of the street in total darkness. Weird, right? And at this point, she notices me, and this is where it gets scary. She turns to look at me, and out of nowhere, just starts sprinting at full speed at my car. And this isn't even like normal running we're talking about. Her arms are out to her sides. The only way I can really describe it is how a zombie would run in a video game. And she is going fast. All I know is she was definitely coming at me, and she looked like she wanted to hurt me. I went into full panic mode. I hit that gas pedal so hard. I must have been going like 60 in a residential area. I did not care. Once I got a little distance away, I looked in my rear view, and I could still barely see her chasing after my car. And that's the end of the story. She was going fast, but of course she couldn't keep up with my car, and I got away. But man, what a terrifying way to start the day. I have no idea who this lady was, or what her intentions were. All I know is, I'm afraid. Hi friends, I hope you're staying safe. If you enjoyed this video, please consider liking and subscribing. It would really mean a lot to me. Thank you for listening. Sweet dreams.